Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We appreciate it. Like I said, we would really love to know what is your role at your organization? If you could maybe post that in the chat, that really helps us, I think, sort of steer the conversation as we decide, as we sort of talk. Whether we're more focused on sort of maybe back-end architecture, cloud provisioning, cloud environments, these types of things, or whether we kind of lean a little bit more into the platform side of the aisle for our platform folks on the call, our DevX folks, our DevOps folks, or whether we lean directly into, development and engineering and all of that sort of stuff. So as you work your, as we work our way through the presentation today, would love to hear what your background is at your organization. So, hello. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We appreciate it. This is another one of Port's community sessions. We're very happy to have you here, and we have an incredible customer here that will be sort of presenting, or better yet, collaborating alongside us as we move through this community session. I'm going to start with a screen share just to sort of set the stage a little bit here. Let me play with a couple of my windows here, if you don't mind. Okay, awesome. So thank you so much. So for those of you that don't know, we're Port, the Agentic engineering platform company, and we really focus on sort of helping our customers adopt best practices within the software development lifecycle, everything from governing cloud sprawl to creating self-service actions and enabling developers to move quicker, faster, with more efficiency, more security, etc., and all the way down to the age of the agent, which is what we're in now. And agentic engineering is taking over our industry, and we play a major role in enabling and governing AI agents and agentic workflows as they operate across a enterprise software development lifecycle. But today is a little bit of a different conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about cleanup, at least partially. We have our great friends here at Aptos, a customer here of Port, and they have an incredible story that we really want to share with our community. And we want you all to maybe take a little bit of inspiration from what they did, how they did it, maybe some of the pitfalls, some of the pros and cons as they worked their way through the process. And they really came out, ahead at the end of it all. So today we're going to be focusing on talking a little bit about, cloud sprawl. What does it look like? What impact does it have? And how can we begin to use Port to clean up that cloud sprawl, to give visibility into our cloud environments, and also to then use those foundations to build things like governed self-service actions, which can be leveraged by humans or AI agents in the future. So we're going to start with just some simple introduction. So hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Kayfish. I run our platform product marketing org here at Port. And I really focus on interacting with customers, with the market, to understand how they are potentially not only using Port, but what are they looking for in their software development lifecycle? Where are there opportunities for improvement, evolution, etc.? And we try to map, Port's product direction to the needs of our customers. And one of our customers here today is Aptos. So I'll let Joel introduce himself as our principal cloud architect to start. Joel.
Hi, yes, I'm Joel Crisp. I'm the Aptos cloud architect for the Aptos One product. My responsibility is basically governance of our AWS cloud resources and any other resources that we have that we use to implement our product. You may not know what we do. We're a company who manages point of sale systems in the fashion retail industry. So if you've bought a fashion accessory, shoes or bags or anything like that in a high street mall store recently, then there's a very good chance that you'll have gone through some of our systems. We are primarily around the solutions and customer relationship management in the store. So we have a hybrid product that runs in store on thousands of devices and in the cloud for the back end. One of the key parts of my role is to keep that back end up and running for those systems. Jordan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan Hughes, VP of Platform Engineering here at Aptos. And in my group, we really help build a lot of our cloud infrastructure. We manage our software delivery. And our software delivery systems include our CI/CD pipelines, includes our environment provisioning and configuration, and then integrations between all of our retail products. Some of them are in the cloud, some of them are on-prem, and third-party integrations. And just to get a sense of what our delivery environment looks like, we manage point of sale systems in retail stores, many of these stores, they've got hundreds to thousands of stores. Each of them have many point of sale devices within the store, and they all are managed as separate infrastructure. And so we need to deploy our software to all these different regions across the world, plus all of these devices that are running Android or iOS. And so the conversation today is going to get into a little bit about how we're utilizing Port to help us with our deployment, just keeping track of everything we've got, all of our assets under management.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Yeah, so I think the major theme here is there's a lot of complexity with your architecture, with your backend more generally, with your infrastructure and how you provision it out to your customers. And we're going to talk a little bit about, what did that look like before port, and sort of what does that look like now. So let's move ahead here. We want to talk a little bit about what was the cloud governance challenge at Aptos. What did it look and feel like? What was the downstream impact of that? What does S3 governance at Aptos look like now? I think we wanted to get really specific on sort of, a particular AWS asset that was particularly problematic for you all, and sort of how that model, cleaning that up, allowed you to, do more downstream improvements as well. We have a live demo that Joel and I will sort of be running together. Joel will be hands on keyboard showing you Aptos' actual environment. So you'll be able to see a little bit about how Aptos thinks about configuring or sort of composing that environment and bringing together some of the major pillars of the port product, right? Software catalog, scorecard, self-service actions, the flexible data model itself, all into one sort of succinct story that we'll tell you today. And then Jordan and myself will talk a little bit about the future of port at Aptos, expansion into the self-service arena, not only for human developers and engineers and technical folks, but also, the future of agentic engineering and what does that potentially look like at Aptos and how can port assist in sort of executing that or bringing that to market within Aptos. So let's talk a little bit about the reality, if that's okay, just to start. So, Joel, I really just want you to maybe comment. We have a few highlights here on the screen to give us some metrics or some numbers to sort of feel that pain. But maybe if you could talk about from a cloud architect perspective, what did it look like and feel like, as Aptos grew, as your customer portfolio grew, as your infrastructure grew? What did this look and feel like, and what was the impact of that rapid growth?
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. So, certainly, and the first thing is that if you don't know that it exists, you can't manage it. And that may sound like a very simple statement, but it really does underpin everything that we've tried to do with Port, because we have over 100 AWS accounts. Across those AWS accounts, we have thousands of S3 buckets, we have EBS volumes, we have VPCs, we have 50 plus Kubernetes clusters. And so just actually keeping track of all of those resources is a very expensive and time-consuming task. And what we were looking to Port to do is the resource discovery and gap analysis so that we could determine what was really in our environments. And these environments have evolved over many years. We have AWS VPCs going back to when they were still 7-digit identifiers. So we have an evolution of different technologies that have been used to manage these resources over time. So bringing port in is going to help us accelerate our velocity, increase our knowledge and our understanding, and be able to identify where we have gaps between our infrastructure as code deployments and some of our more legacy deployments. And this would be particularly relevant for things like developer environments and professional services environments, where typically we have more people deploying things through ClickOps, more people creating temporary resources for, say an individual project or a customer import that is problematic, that they need to basically put the data into an isolated bucket for some troubleshooting or whatever, anything like that. And we need to make certain that, after those resources are no longer in use, that they're appropriately destroyed. So we could do all of that with the AWS console, but as you get over, 3 or 4 AWS accounts, the AWS console starts to be not terribly useful for some of these things, particularly things like, well, what is the actual size of the data in this S3 bucket is a perennial question that people pressure AWS for, and AWS don't want to answer it. So, with Port, we were able to expose information like that in a much more consumable way with a single pane of glass across all of our accounts, all of our resources, all of our regions. We can get a report that summarizes everything nicely for our management. Um, so at the end of the day, when we're finished with these resources, we need to make certain we clean them up. There's lots of governance frameworks. We have certifications in GDPR and SOC and ISO and lots of other things like that that require us to have processes and policies that conform to those standards. So what Port's allowing us to do is get that evidence, get the proof, get the governance in place in an accelerated fashion.
Yeah, so
Um,
I think we'll get into that in a moment here, but I think I just kind of
mhm.
want to highlight, the reality was, Aptos operates in sort of a regulated environment, or at least they have many sort of policies and regulations on top of them to operate. They also have, this broad customer base that requires these sorts of partitioned, if you will, models with all these different AWS accounts, and that level of sort of complexity, that level of infrastructure complexity specifically, can become quite a toil, quite a burden, quite a hassle over time, especially as you're trying to organize it or manage it all in some sort of coordinated fashion. And I think what I really wanted to highlight here, Joel and Jordan, you can speak to this as well, which is, this complexity has an impact, right? The complexity isn't just, it's a problem in itself, in its own little bucket. But that downstream complexity means that you guys had quite a bit of impact when you were preparing for audits, when you were trying to support your customers, even support your internal resources, getting questions answered, understanding which bucket is associated with this customer. Can we spin it down? Is it going to impact something? Getting those questions answered, in a reasonable amount of time, and also accurately answered, of course, but in a reasonable amount of time can be very difficult. And those downstream impacts were really affecting your ability to sort of deliver not only for your customers, but also even for your internal teams. And I think when we think about platform engineering specifically, we really think about our internal teams being our customers and serving them up something that they can leverage and use and run forward as quickly as possible. So I don't know, Jordan, do you have any additional comment here around, what did that reality feel like? And maybe how did this sort of cloud data chaos or this cloud chaos kind of impact some of the downstream teams that would leverage some of this information?
Yeah, the big impact I think would be issue identification, right? Something's cropped up in an environment somewhere, right? How do we identify what is it? And one of our challenges is we've got multiple teams deploying different pieces in production. And over time, right, maybe our infrastructure's code practices weren't as shored up as they are today, right? We get environmental drift, right? We don't know what's actually there. And so port coming in gives us an authority into the perspective of what is actually deployed, right? This is what we think is deployed, but this is what's actually deployed in this environment. And it should speed up our issue identification much quicker so we can identify, here's the issue, triage it to the right team, and actually resolve issues much quicker. So that was
Yeah.
one of the pain points we felt. And then the second one, just cost overruns getting out of control. We don't know what's deployed, right? Things are running, maybe they should be deprecated, and we just want to be able to manage that a little bit better.
Yeah, two very important pieces of the puzzle. So a little bit on the challenge, and I think this ties directly back to what we've been talking about, but fragmented ownership. So there were these assets that were sort of scattered across. Maybe there was some attempted organization or coordination here, but it was let's say it wasn't production grade. But things like manual diagnostics, and I think Jordan, you literally just mentioned this. What do we do when an incident occurs? How do we figure out what the incident is, who should solve it, what its blast radius is, etc. We had cloud spiral and environmental drift, as well as invisible waste. So not only these sorts of time to life issues, a developer or an engineer spinning up an environment to do some work in that just kind of sits open for a long time, but also, these stale S3 buckets that may or may not be stale. It's kind of hard to tell. It's hard to deduce that. Any additional commentary on some of the challenges that you experienced? And maybe we'll start with Joel, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is that most of the people on a call like this will be familiar with the kind of issues that you come across when you're running large AWS deployments and large numbers of resources in clouds. Asset lifecycle management is a very key part of anything that anybody in cloud does. As everybody knows, we're all very concerned about cloud costs, particularly with the way the cloud service providers tend to nickel and dime us. So, being able to have that extra insight into our resource footprints and being able to identify, these are the outliers where we want to go in and say, we should be focusing our attention on some of these resources so that we can get some quick wins in terms of our cost footprint, and things like that. And of course, the other thing is when you have a lot of this information in Confluence, Confluence is where information goes to die. And we have this situation where you have a lot of information that is in there that is not well organized, that is not queryable, unactionable, and can't be used to drive automated resources very easily, automated processes very easily. So what we were looking to do was take a lot of that tribal knowledge and the information that existed in the org but was not consistent or coherent in a way that we could utilize it effectively and turn that into something where we could accelerate our troubleshooting, we could accelerate our audit information gathering, and we could do all of those things through a centralized system that would draw together multiple disparate resources for us. So, as Jordan mentioned, we have a lot of infrastructure as code over the years. Some of that's been Terraform, some of it's been CloudFormation, some of it's been Bash scripting. But what we want to do is we want to identify where the various gaps are with that and narrow those gaps down. So yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
you've got anything to add to that, Jordan.
No, that was great.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of what you brought up at the beginning, Joel, right? Which is, you don't know what you don't know,
Hmm.
kind of the unknown unknown. So the first thing is getting that under control and at least understanding, okay, what don't we know? Let's try to unveil it, if you will. And then once we know, then we can decide where we should focus our effort for the largest ROI, right? What are the biggest problem areas? What do we have to sort out that's really impacting, whether it's cost metrics or latency on ability to address issues via support channels or anything else. But making sure that you have visibility into where your biggest problem childs, if you will, and then making sure that you work on those first. Okay, so let's jump forward here, which is the solution. So finally, we kind of move away from the problem statement into how exactly have you guys solved this and think about solving this. So really, one of the focuses at Port here, I sometimes view Port. We're many things, right? We're an agentic engineering platform, sort of at our heart, but we're also have capabilities for internal developer portals or platforms. We have engineering capabilities, really focused on measurement. And this is an example, I think, of sort of bringing together a couple of those pieces of the puzzle, giving us the ability to do some cloud governance that we can actually measure over time as well. So, Joel, maybe if you want to talk a little bit about how you brought this forth, right? Starting with step one, which is what we talked about, going through that discovery process, then going through an enrichment process, and maybe how did you interact with other teams as you worked your way through that enrichment process? Then applying things like scorecards and being able to measure these things, give them sort of a bronze, silver, gold status, and then also acting. So, we take a look at some of the backlog and cleaning up the backlog. What does the forelog look like, or sort of the future as well?
Yeah, so I mean, as we mentioned, one of the things about resources, if you don't know they're there, you can't manage them. So one of the first things we did was connect Port's Ocean agent to our AWS accounts. That then allowed Port to discover all of our AWS accounts from the organization level down. And within that, we were able to scan through all of the S3 buckets across all of our regions, all of our accounts, and get a list of them in one place. We then used that to drive a secondary enrichment process where we enabled S3 bucket inventory for all of the S3 buckets, which is a feature Amazon provides where once a day they will take a list of every single object in your S3 bucket and they will dump it into a file for you. So what we did was we had a process whereby we were using the scorecards and the reports in Port to identify which S3 buckets did not have inventory on. We rolled out inventory across the entire 100 AWS accounts, 3,000 plus S3 buckets. And then what we do is we scan those inventory files and we extract information from those inventory files, summarize the size, look at the age of the newest and oldest file in that bucket. We look at whether or not there's a Terraform state file in that bucket, and so on. So this allows us to have a lot more insight into our systems, and we didn't have to build the reporting engine. We didn't have to build the database. What we did was we just put a couple of Python scripts in a container, pointed them at the resources, and just let them upload all the information to port.
Yeah, understood. So that's a great first step, right? Is bringing all of that together, utilizing Port to sort of orchestrate it all, if you will, pull it all into a single location. Now, if we could talk a little bit about what the process was after that, and I'd like to show the group if that's okay, Joel. So maybe we don't need to dive too far into it, but when we think about doing things like enrichment that may require additional teams involvement, or routing some of this cleanup work. I know there was always concern about ownership. How have you sort of thought about using Port as a collaboration tool, if you will, to help sort of bring that information directly into a singular location, into the software catalog, into the system of record, that you can then, once you have ownership, right, and accountability, there's a lot of sort of downstream things that you can then improve upon as well. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that for the group, that would be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, obviously, one of the things that Port allows us to do that is not very easy with AWS Console or some of the other tools that already exist is present this information in a way that's consumable to management. And that was a very important thing for us to do. So, instead of my boss having to go off and say to one team, hey, what do you know about this? And then go to another team and say, hey, what do you know about this? What we can say to him is, look, go into Port, there's a report on that. You can go and see the status here. This is all you need to know. This is all you need to do. You don't need to know the details of that we're using Terraform for managing this set of resources and CloudFormation for managing this set, right? What you'll be able to see is a summary import that covers all of that information. And this allowed us to because we could communicate that information effectively to management, we could communicate it to management of other teams. So we were able to go to some of the teams for some of the legacy products that we have and say, hey guys, we just noticed that you have some S3 buckets around here where the newest file is a couple of years old, right? Are these buckets still in use? And because we could present that information to them directly on the screen in front of them, and in a very simple to consume format, we were able to enhance the communication between the teams and get them to take effective action on that.
Yeah, and I think that's a story that I think we're hearing a lot across Port's customer portfolio, which is, I think, of course, Port is used by developers and engineers, right? To kind of start, and of course, platform teams build on it, build within it, and then they deliver these sorts of workflows, and they deliver different things back to their organization in various ways. But the more and more, in speaking with all of the customers that I do speak with, more and more we're seeing folks say exactly what Joel just said, which was, I actually built something for leadership. I built a dashboard for leadership. I built something that they could easily understand, that they could easily consume. All they had to do is go there, they get all of their questions asked. And then you actually add on Port's, AI agent or AI assistant right there in the Port UI. What additional questions do they have? They don't even need to come to me anymore to try to answer some of these little questions. They can see the dashboard, they can be inspired, they can have a few other questions, they can immediately jump into Port's AI assistant, which is rooted in your organization's context lake, right, in your organization's flexible data model, and get those questions answered right there at the drop of a hat, and really steer their business decisions in very intelligent ways. So again, I just think that the more that I use Port, the more that I help customers use Port, and the more that I speak to folks about Port, the more I really see its application being very broad across a number of different personas within any given organization. Okay, I'm looking at the time, and I'd like to move ahead here. So the next thing that I just wanted to talk about is just really quick about sort of how sort of Port works, right? And for those of you that maybe are new to developer portals like Port or agentic engineering platforms, where we're bringing together a variety of different end user types, different personas, all into a single developer portal or platform. Now, the platform engineering team is in charge of like building, the golden pass, what we call within that, so that these technical teams can easily access their platform ecosystem in ways that are efficient, secure, compliant, and very reliable. And we'll show a little bit about what that looks like in the end as well. So it's not just for, our developers, but we have VPs of engineer, we have our CTOs in here as well, learning about their software development lifecycle, iterating upon it, and improving it. Joel or Jordan, do you have any additional comment here before we jump into the next part of this presentation?
I just noticed a question from one of our participants about how we're getting the other resources into port that the Cloud Controller API doesn't support. And this is where we found the port API that port exposes is a very easy way for us to upload and modify the data in port. And we particularly do this with our S3 enrichment process. After port discovers our S3 buckets, we get a list of S3 buckets, we query the API for that list, we iterate over that list, reading the inventory files, and then we upload the enriched information back to port again via the API. And that was a pretty easy thing to do. A little bit of Boto 3, a little bit of Python, a little bit of the port API, and so we find it actually very easy to integrate with other information sources. And if it's not supported directly, we can load it in.
Yes, I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much, Joel. Always happy to hear a little, a heavy plus for our APIs. Huge fan. And again, you mentioned Ocean earlier, our sort of open source integration framework. Very, very powerful for not only for maybe integrations that we don't have sort of a native integration set up for, but more generally, bringing things into port in an easy, structured way is incredibly valuable for many of our different customers. Okay, so I'm gonna move ahead here to our next piece of the puzzle, and we're gonna get into the demonstration in just a second here, and Joel is gonna walk us through everything that we've been talking about essentially. But before we jump into that, we really want to highlight some of the results of these actions that Aptos has taken thus far. So we've noted that you've cleaned up over 170 terabytes of data, 30K in annual savings, and that number is likely just to increase over time. And I believe that's just from sort of the cloud data cleanup. That's not, you're not measuring, the reduction in time for support and, the work that you've done with audits and things like that. So I think, it's all comes into play here. But now it takes just minutes, if not seconds, for folks to answer questions. Who owns this? What customer is this connected to? Is this, on the critical path, or is this a critical part of our infrastructure, or is it not? And also, saving hours in audit preparation and support as well. Any commentary on some of the results that you've seen from just, kind of this initial sort of cleanup that you've seen there at Aptos?
So I think, the bottom line on this is that we're saving money, and we hope to save more money, and we're doing that by increased efficiency and by being able to, for example, in the future, as we onboard more customers, because we're a hybrid single-tenant, multi-tenant model, when we onboard a large customer, and some of our customers are very large, we don't want to have to hire additional support people every time we onboard a new customer. Right. What we want to do is make our existing support team more efficient, more effective, and so that they can support more customers as we onboard those additional customers without us having to spend a lot more money on support costs. Similarly, we're looking at some of the self-service action stuff so that some of the very routine things that we do can be more easily streamlined. Restarting a failed import is something that we do a lot of. Our customers' data is extremely complicated, and the import formats reflect that. So sometimes what we have is we have discrepancies in the import data that need to have somebody, take action proactively to resolve an import issue. And we want to be able to start automating some of those import issue resolution fixes so that we can have our support team being able to do it more effectively than having to go in and do it manually. Similarly, we want to be able to streamline our delivery process. We have over 130 microservices in our product, and just delivering those consistently and coherently across our platform is something that we have a lot of focus on doing. I think Jordan can probably explain more about that and some recent successes we've had in that area as well. But we are very much focused on efficiency, velocity, quality, and being able to maintain all of those things as we move forward.
Good. Yeah, I love to hear it. Thanks for the commentary. Jordan, did you have anything to add, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, looking, we'll see this in the demo, but just taking the early work that Joel has done, right, and being able to take that, have a good kind of management overlay of the data, and then be able to action it, right, and have it be very clear. Okay, here's the S3 bucket, here's the path, this is where you go to clean it up. Very easy, very simple to action. Ownership's clear, so it definitely sped up going through this kind of cloud hygiene process.
Yeah, I think some people forget that, the cleanup gives you the foundations to build on top of, right? A variety of different, things that you can build. And one of the things that I personally love about Port, that people who use Porch a lot know this, is that Porch is really made up of a set of different components or building blocks. That once you kind of do some of this initial foundational work, building your data model, going through some of this cleanup process, you can begin to pull those building blocks out, arrange them in ways that solve your problem. Aptos had their particular use case, their sort of cloud sprawl and these issues with S3 buckets, and sort of tying everything together, tying like a customer stack all together. And they leveraged Port in their own unique way to solve this particular problem. So let's take a look at what that unique way looks like. We're going to jump into the live demo, which Joel is going to take over. He's going to show us a little bit of what that initial inventory process sort of looked like, show us a little bit of the enrichment and how they think about sort of configuring the catalog, if you will, configuring the inventory and what it looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about scorecards, maybe a little bit about entity relationships and how we trace some of these pieces of the puzzle, how we connect or relate some of these different pieces of their software development lifecycle, particularly for an individual customer. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about self-service actions and sort of the future of ports at Aptos as well. So I'll stop sharing. I'll pass it over to Joel to share his screen.
So hopefully everybody can see my screen now. Um, what we have here is the S3 bucket utilization report that I was discussing earlier. And we can see here, that we have at the top, this is sorted by total object size and object count. This bucket is actually legit. We did actually investigate this bucket, and we discovered that the data that's stored in this bucket is actually current, active, and being used. So we were able to look at that. But what we can see very clearly here is this bucket is an outlier, 74.5 terabytes, with the next nearest bucket being round about the 40 terabyte mark, after which we have a long tail dropping off, right down to, we're down to 8.2 terabytes in the bucket as we get to just the end of this page of information here. And this is across 3,000 odd S3 buckets. So what we can do with this is we can see very clearly, there is an outlier here. We can take action on it. We can go and investigate it. In this case, the investigation showed that this particular bucket was fine, but there have been other buckets that we've looked at that were less fine, and we were able to take action to remedy that. And then one of the other things that we can see here is one of the signs that these buckets are still current is the newest file date in here is 3 days ago, and the oldest file date is 3 months ago. So we know this bucket is under active governance now, because we can see that the oldest file is a sensible time period ago, and that the newest file is within the last week. So there is active activity within this bucket. And again, this is something that's very easy to report on once you've got all this data in port. And could we do it in a spreadsheet? Yes. Could we do it in another form of database? Yes. Right. But what Port allows us to do is do it in a very nice environment, which also integrates the scorecards, the discovery, the API, the reporting, and the ability to handle multiple disparate data sources very easily. So that's really the plus advantage we're getting from Port here. And I'll go into more of that in a little bit in a minute. But we can see the newest file, and we can also see that we have some past notifications here. So what we're doing is we are utilizing the scorecard feature to look at the information that we have about this S3 bucket, and we are using this scorecard feature to make it very obvious when the bucket is in good state. And we can look at that a little bit more if we look across at the scorecard here, where we have, the number of buckets that have had the rules that have passed for this particular set of rules. And we can see the summaries here of the number of buckets that are in gold, silver, and bronze state. So this is something where, again, we can see the passing rules and the failing rules for each one of these categories of scorecard. And it's very nice and simple. This was the thing that particularly we liked about the port summarize for things like scorecards here, is that these there's not a lot of complexity in how this information is presented, and that makes it very consumable for the management tier and the other teams. Again, I mentioned the S3 bucket inventory. Very easy for us to get a report like this where we can see 97% of our S3 buckets have inventory enabled on them. We were tracking this using this particular report while we were rolling this out across all of our accounts. We can see here that we have a lot of the developers have got some new buckets created here. So there's some churn going on in development where they're creating some buckets that are not fully automated. And so we don't have inventory enabled on them by default. We can now go and very easily enact an action to enable S3 bucket inventory on those buckets. And that's something we'll be automating soon. At the moment, it's a cron job, but one of the things that Port allows us to do is actively tie that to entity creation so that when a new entity is created for an S3 bucket, it will go off and add inventory to it automatically. We're looking forward to getting that implemented. One of the other things that we can report on is we scan as we load those S3 inventories in, we scan them for Terraform state files. So in addition to having that flag on the S3 bucket that says is the S3 bucket inventory enabled, we have a flag that says, is there a Terraform state file stored in this bucket as well? And so we can very easily report on all of our S3 buckets that have Terraform state files in. So with that, we can actually download the Terraform states and upload that information into Port. And again, we do this through a Port webhook and a container that runs on a cron job basis. So it goes and once the bucket inventory is produced once a day, we go and scan that bucket inventory a few hours later to make certain that it's all propagated. And then we find all of these Terraform state files, download them, parse them, and load the information into Port. So what this gives us is we can go and look at a specific S3 bucket in Port, and we can see a summary of, does the oldest file exist and is it less than 90 days old? What's the total object size? Does it have an inventory on it? Does it have a Terraform state file stored in it? And we can see here that this bucket is larger than the threshold we put for size. So the size scorecard check failed for this bucket. And that means that this bucket's falling under silver governance, not gold, because we've got too much information stored in this bucket. It's exceeded our threshold for what we would like to see stored in an S3 bucket. And we can see that information very clearly for this bucket immediately on here. We can see very clearly which AWS account it's in. We can see the newest file date and the oldest file date for it. So this bucket definitely looks like it's still active. And we can also see the related entities for these buckets here. And interestingly enough, one of the related entities on this bucket is a Terraform resource. So what we have done in Port is associate the Terraform resource that created this S3 bucket with the AWS resource for the bucket itself that exists in AWS. So we can see here, this bucket is under infrastructure as code management. Good. Not only that, but we can go to this Terraform resource and we can look and we can see the Terraform resource here, and we can see the Terraform state file that manages this bucket. So we've gone from an asset in AWS to the fact that it's managed by Terraform, to the Terraform resource that created that bucket, to the Terraform state file that contains the resource that created that bucket. And from that, we can also look at why was that bucket created? What is that Terraform state file reflecting? We can link to the Terraform module in Bitbucket. We can link to the values files that were used during that Terraform run. So we now have a much, much clearer picture of where did this resource come from, and how was this resource created, and is this resource being actively managed? So these things are really interesting facts for us, and we were really interested in seeing that. Um, so that is the sort of way in which we've been able to discover our resources, discover our AWS accounts, from the AWS accounts, discover the S3 buckets. From discovering the S3 buckets, we can get a lot of enriched information about the S3 bucket and load it into a single place import. And one of the things that we can't very easily do with the AWS console, for example, is this association of Terraform state with the actual AWS asset itself. That's a very powerful feature for us to be able to do that. Um, so, Jordan, I think, do you have anything you want to add at this point?
No, looks good so far.
Yeah.
So,
So,
Joel, there was one question in the chat here that I think is kind
yeah.
of interesting. So I just want to comment on the Terraform state, the sensitive data question, right? So port, of course, all data is encrypted in transit and at rest here, SOC 2 type 2, the whole nine yards. But Joel, maybe it's a better question, are you sending all those state files to port? Are you considering handling them in a different way because of some of the sensitive data within them? Or do you concern yourself at all with that, or is that something that due to port's general enterprise security posture is not a big concern to you?
So, security is obviously very important to us across the board with everything. We have a very strong security team. We work very closely with that security team in cloud architecture. And one of the things that attracted us to Port was that we have a lot of control over our data here. So we are not actually uploading the raw Terraform state file itself. We're parsing it locally on our side and calling the Port API to upload just the information that we want to have in Port. So we have a lot of control over our ability to decide what information goes up to ports. And the same thing with the Ocean agent. So when we built our AWS mapping, we were able to pick which fields from which AWS resources actually got uploaded to port. So we could choose, for example, not to upload anything from KMS, the key management system. We could choose if we had tags on a port, an AWS resource, whether or not we want to upload those tags, for example. But overall, one of the things that we had to do as part of our due diligence was a security assessment of port before we were allowed to adopt it as a product. So we were able to go to port and say, have you got the evidence for your security posture? And, as Cameron mentioned, they've got the certifications, they've got the evidence that there is a strong security posture on their side as well. So that was very helpful to us to get it past our legal team and our security team as a product we were able to adopt. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much. So another question that came in, and I think we're about to move into this, but the relations, of course, you're showing sort of Terraform, you're showing these AWS resources. Can we maybe talk, or maybe better yet, you can show us a little bit about what that relationship structure sort of looks like in port and what you've been able to model out thus far?
Yeah, certainly. And one of the things I would say actually here is, although this is a live demo against live Aptos data, this is not necessarily showing everything that we have done because there's some things we can't show for commercial reasons. So, but what we do have is a representative sample of the data in here. And so what I can show you here is if we go to, for example, the related entities on here, this is a powerful feature of the fact that Port is essentially a knowledge graph. And so being a knowledge graph, what we can see is we can see the entities that are related to this. So we can see the S3 buckets that are related to this Terraform resource, right? So we can see that there's actually two S3 buckets being managed here. We can see the Terraform state that's related to this, and we can see the AWS account that's related to this. And we can also add any other information that we like to this because of the fact Port uses a flexible data model. And one other thing that we can do with this is we can actually see the dependency graph here. So we can see that this Terraform resource has a Terraform state. The Terraform state is stored in an S3 bucket. The S3 bucket is stored in an AWS account, associated with an AWS account. And so by doing this, we can actually see that there's also the bucket that is storing the Terraform state file, and the resource that is managed by this resource, Terraform resource. So this is a great way for us to be able to easily navigate. And I'll show you another one of these, because one of the other things that we care a lot about is our service dependency model. And this is something that we're building out across our microservices as well. As I mentioned, we have multiple databases. We have 130 microservices approximately. Some of those are third-party products. Some of them are Aptos internal products. And we need to be able to model the dependencies between those. So if we take a look at this actual service itself, which is the system for managing our entire cloud asset lifecycle management. This is Panopticon. We built Panopticon on top of Port, so Port is a very key component for this. But we have an ITIL service definition for this particular service. ITIL is well-known standard, particularly well-known in Europe, but is making inroads in America as well. And it sets out a series of policies and processes and definitions for IT governance. It's a governance framework. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was start building out an ITIL compatible model for our resources, where we could see what services. So again, for this particular service, one of the things that we are very interested in is qualifying the quality of our services so that we can improve on the quality. And we want to do this for every single one of our services. So for this, we've got, going back to that point about security, we have a security review that is current and passed for this. So we can see very easily on this scorecard that we have this security review posture. We can see that the logging format is JSON. Our preferred logging format is now OTel. We've changed our rules. And this is where we want to be able to track the improvement in Port. So we know that we have services that have text logging format. We know we have services that have JSON logging format. What we want to do is we want to, in a controlled way, track our progress in moving all of those services over to OTel logging format, which is the contemporary standard. And that allows us to very easily see that this service does not have that flagged up as passed on this scorecard. And of course, because we can report on all of these scorecarding rules, we can say, well, how's that initiative going to get all of our logging formats standardized on OTel? And so we can go to the related entities for this, because Panopticon depends on other things, right? And this is true of very many services in IT, that you depend on a database, you might depend on a third-party API, you might depend on another service. And it's important to actually know and understand what those relationships are. So in this case, we have a dependency on Port itself. We have a dependency on the Ocean agent, the S3 bucket ingest process, Terraform state ingest process, and the actual cluster where all of this runs. Umbrella is our centralized observability platform based around Grafana stack. And that was one of our other initiatives to improve efficiency by coalescing all of our observability into a single stack and a centralized deployment of Grafana. And we can see this again if we look at the graph here. We can start seeing very easily that our service depends on other things that depend on something else. And this is great knowledge for the support teams. If they're saying, well, why is this service misbehaving, and they look at it and they see that it's got a link to a third-party API, they can then go and verify that that third-party API is responding correctly. But that is information they might not have unless it's tribal knowledge, or they hit on the right Confluence page that describes that architecture. They may not even know that there is a dependency between one of our services and some third-party service that is now misbehaving. So what it allows the support team to do is go in and very quickly and easily see where they should be looking for problems, and where they should be looking to see if something else is running slowly. Is a database running slowly that's causing a service to run slowly? And one of the questions that we were getting asked before was, well, which Capella database is actually being used by this service? And people were like, well, it's in Confluence. And then somebody else was like, well, where is it in Confluence? And so, there was a back and forth, there was time wasted, there was information that was hard to discover, even though it was known and recorded, right? It wasn't consumable. And I think this is where what we're looking to do is by putting all of this stuff into a single pane of glass across Terraform, AWS. We'll be building out resources across our databases. We're building out resources across Argo CD. So all of those um, services that are deployed into our Kubernetes clusters are deployed with Argo CD. So now what we can do is we can bring Argo CD into port as well, and we can start putting all of that information from all of those disparate other services and sources into a single place and correlating it in that single place.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. And thank you so much for showing the graph here as well. Of course, we want to highlight that really Port does function as a knowledge graph for our customers. So that's fantastic.
And AI,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
because
I
it's an MCP server as well. So
that's a
yeah.
good point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, well, yeah, I mean, maybe just to wrap you up here, Joel, and then we'll go over
Mhm.
to Jordan here in the future. But from the MCP perspective, can you maybe talk a little bit about the how you're using sort of our server today, as well as how you expect to sort of release it to your organization a little bit more broadly?
So right now we're still in the data load phase of this project. We're doing a lot of data discovery. People who've worked on projects like this before, I'm sure will be familiar with the concept that, you have to get the information into the tool before you can use the tool to query the information. So we're still doing a lot of that. We have a lot of information in here that we're able to query already, but we're expanding that footprint out across many of our other resources and teams too. And one of those things that we'll be doing is qualifying all of our services with the ITIL service definition. And then what we're going to do is we have an AI hub in Aptos. That AI hub is capable of consuming data from sources like MCP servers. And what we'll be doing is um, connecting that AI hub to port so that a support engineer can go in and query through the AI hub interface if that's what they prefer, rather than coming in and looking at the reports in port directly.
I love it. Yeah, everybody uses Port in their own unique way, and that's really what makes it a platform. If you don't mind, I'm going to take over the screen share in the last couple
Hmm.
minutes here. We're going to talk about sort of Act 3 here, which is our expansion. So, Joel, I'll wait until you stop the screen share there.
There we go.
Thank you. So now we're going to switch gears just a little bit in the remaining time. Thanks for sticking with us, everybody. So, we've gone through, the initial cleanup, that cloud hygiene into sort of self-service operations. You've heard the team sort of talk a little bit about that, and we want to move further along sort of the evolutionary life cycle, if you will, of modern engineering, of modern software development, which is into agentic. So, Jordan, I would love for you to maybe talk a little bit about, from a platform perspective, from a developer perspective, what does the future look like for engineering at Aptos, and how does Port, fit into that future?
Yeah, we started with kind of the asset lifecycle management part of Port, and now we're starting to look at how do we treat it like an internal developer portal, right? How can this be somewhere where all of our developers or quality analysts or business analysts or professional services arm of our business can come and can do actions, right? Can take actions whether themselves or whether through agents. Provisioning infrastructure, right, is probably going to be our first pass at this, right? How do we stand up new Kubernetes clusters, new environments with the push of a button? We've got multiple tools to do that. We've got the infrastructure as code, but that's very developer centric, right? How can we equip our QA team, right, that's maybe focused on something a little different to be able to do the same? Um, so that's something deploying new services. Again, we've consolidated a lot of our CI/CD pipeline to deploy services in a repeatable way. But how do we open it up to more people? I think Port is going to be a really good tool for that. And again, agents do fit into this, right, where we can action it through others beyond ourselves. And the last one's governance, right? Part of platform is how do we govern what we do, right? A lot of our configuration, we try to manage the schemas within code, within Git. But that's hard. That's a difficult training exercise, right? We want to bring a lot of that kind of configuration management and make Port the authority. Port can manage it. Scorecards is a great tool to help us enforce that. as well as kind of provide that paved road where developers or QA or cloud operations people can go and take action. It's very repeatable. And most of the work is done. Maybe developers just add a little business logic on the side, but 80 or 90% of the actual platform pieces are done for them, and they can just focus on the business value and business value alone. So that's some of the places where we're going. Um, we do want to get into the self-service portal and having the different widgets. Maybe you could show that. We're not quite there yet, but this is where we're going.
Yeah, I think I can flash it really quick while we're all here. So what Joel is talking about is sort of our self-service portal here, right? So they want the ability for developers and engineers and all different types of folks to be able to come in and say, "Hey, I need a dev environment." But of course, we want to not only provide them an efficient way to sort of request this, but also a secure way, like that follows compliance and that doesn't add any sprawl that they all just cleaned up. So I think this is a really good example of the dynamic forms that can adjust based upon the user type that you are. You can get the environment spun up that you need. You can execute your tasks, and it's not going to cause a headache for Joel and the architects and the architecture team down the road there. And also, of course, all of this, this is of course within a UI, so we can show you this in a UI, but this is accessible via our MCP server. So if you're in your IDE and you don't want to lose your context, you can request it via the MCP server as well. Of course, you can hit this via our APIs as well. So a few different ways to sort of get to this piece of the puzzle. All right,
And what
everyone.
this gives us, Cameron, over some of the other tooling that we have already is, one, we get a lot of feedback from people that they like the UI here, that it's very clean and modern. But the other thing is we can build this on top of our knowledge graph. And this is what the real advantage for us is, with some of our other tooling, when we want to go and say, okay, pick a customer to deploy a new service into, right? There isn't that knowledge in a way that it can be queried and provided in a drop down in a form for us yet. So, that would involve somebody going and cutting and pasting some customer information out of Confluence into a form somewhere to run a process or pipeline. And with Port, what we can do is we can integrate all of that with the actual knowledge model itself. Sorry, back over to you.
Oh, no, not at all. Hey, I appreciate it. Any opportunity that, customer can speak about Port in their own words is an opportunity I don't want to miss. I want to make sure we end right on time. So thank you so much, everybody. I'll stick around, and maybe if the Aptos folks would like to, you can as well. We have a survey that just hit the screen. We would love to understand, cloud governance and, are you running into issues? Is it an active part of your sort of initiatives for early 2026? Are you planning to make it an initiative? What does that look and feel like for you all? And also, I'll stick around and make sure that any questions in the QA are answered, any questions in the chat, we answer or at least sort of route you in the right direction here. So thank you, Joel. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, our lovely viewers as well. We always appreciate you coming to join us. We hope you got a ton of value out of this session. And reach out any questions or concerns. We want to make sure that we can either align you with some sort of a solution engineer that can help you, or maybe even have a conversation with myself if you're interested. So thank you all so much, everyone.
So I can quickly answer a couple of the questions that I see on the chat here, particularly from Anil, who's asked some very good questions here. So for the microservice information, we're modeling a lot of the ITIL service level definitions in Git, in Bitbucket. So we have a small YAML file associated with each service that is effectively ingested by Port, and that allows us to keep all of that information very close to the actual service itself. It's very easy for a developer to maintain it because it's right there next to the code, and it is just in YAML. So they are able to add fields to that. We just tweak the port mapping to ingest any new fields that they want to add. So this allows us to do a lot of the service discovery out of Bitbucket directly into Port. Once the record exists in Port, then we can add things to it like the columns for scorecarding and any other information or enrichment that we want to add to that. And one of the things that we can do as part of that YAML document is model relationships. So Port's ingest process allows you to look up related records as part of the ingest process through their ingest mapping and be able to do that as part of the ETL effectively. that when we load a record in there, we can say, okay, find me other records where this field in the other record matches this field in this record. Not quite a SQL query, but it's pretty easy to do. So hopefully that answers that question there. Everybody knows that tags in AWS is a nightmare. Everybody wants to add tags. Everybody knows that tags are a good thing, but actually doing it across all of the myriad of AWS resources and making it all consistent is hard. If the tags exist, we can use them. If they don't exist, Port allows us to have another option for doing that mapping of ownership and discovery of information without having to rely on the tags. So that's another thing to that point of ingest. Self-service provisioning. I think Cameron mentioned Port has an RBAC system. We actually have a pipeline environment that we have as well that manages our Argo CD and our pipelines. That also has RBAC and audit in it. And one of the things we're looking to do is use Port to drive access to that system in such a way that in some cases we can have the actor be Port rather than the actor being an individual user. So we can do a service-to-service authentication across there, and we can use the richer information in the Port knowledge graph to provide additional RBAC based on what's available in our pure pipeline system.
And I'll comment on that one too. Of course, as Joel mentioned, RBAC, but also not only RBAC sort of role-based access control for actually executing the actions, but also those dynamic forms that I showed. So when you actually pull up a self-service action, it can be dynamic according to your user type, right? And of course, generally, of course, we have user groups in the tool as well, but everyone has their own individual users. So you'll be able to really manage that very, very closely. And the second thing is also agents as well, right? We also treat agents in the same exact framework, role-based access control, guardrails. They have specific tool calls that they can make and can't make. They have specific access to the knowledge graph or context lake or flexible data model, et cetera. So we really treat it all with a very high level of enterprise grade security, not just on the back end as well, but also on the front end too. So we don't confuse anyone as they're trying to do whatever they're trying to do within the Port platform.
Yeah, and there's also the ability to have the organizations model. So this is something that I think Port introduced fairly recently. We haven't heavily leveraged it yet, although we're aware it exists. And this allows you to have a separate Port organization for your production environment from, say, your development environment. So if you want to do that, you can have a completely isolated instance for production from your other environments. We are still in the process of determining how we want to move forward with that, whether or not we want to have a separate environment. But Port provides a Terraform provider for itself. So one of the ways we can keep our Port organizations in sync is by using Terraform to deploy the data model for Port itself.
Yep.
So we're looking at that as well. There's another question I saw on here about drift status. Obviously, drift is very important to everybody who works with it. Port itself doesn't directly do the drift management, but what we can do is the Terraform pipelines that we can run those in a plan mode, and we can then upload the information into Port. So where we have a Terraform state record in Port, one of the things we could do is run a plan in one of our own containers and then upload the results of that plan as a Boolean field on Port or something like that, saying, is this Terraform state current or is there drift? And then we can do a report on how many of our Terraform states have drift, and we can identify which ones we need to go and look at and investigate the drift. Because drift is one of those things that's unfortunately difficult to remedy automatically. It takes a human agent or an AI to go in there and actually say, well, why is this drift occurring? Because as we all know, drift can come from many different sources, right? AWS can have updated their Terraform provider. Terraform can have changed something in their model. Somebody can have gone and changed something manually on the resource itself, or something can have been changed automatically on the resource. Like, AWS have a tendency to update fields on resources for various reasons that shows up as drift, even though it isn't. So, there's a very complex topic there, but it's an excellent question to have asked.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joel, for sticking on and answering questions. Jordan, thank you for your perspective from the platform side of the aisle as well, and sort of the future. I know we'll be working close together moving forward. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for your great questions. Thank you for being engaged and active. We love doing these community sessions. We love bringing customers along to tell their story out of their mouth. And hopefully it gave you a bit of inspiration as well. The last thing that I'll just say is Netta put a few different links in there for folks that are maybe new to port. Where can you go to try some of this stuff out, or to look at an environment and see if it's a good fit for you, for your organization? We also have our community there as well. Please join. We add updates there and webinars that we're doing, or community sessions that we're doing. And of course, the last link there, if this really appealed to you, set up a one-on-one demo. It's no skin off your back, if you will. And we'll listen to you, we'll understand what your pain points are, and we'll walk you through how we think about solving them using port, and what we've done with our great friends and customers like Aptos, for example. So Joel, Jordan, thank you so much. Thank you everybody on the call, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye now.